All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Timothy Peterkin, and thank you for joining the CLE today, sponsored by Law to the People. And guess what we're going to do before we get started? Anybody? No? I just do this every single time. We have a few brief administrative announcements to go over, and it's for those who've heard it 4 times a day. But for somebody listening right now on the webinar, this is special for you, right? It's your first time. This is a 1.5-hour CLE. It is part of a 6-hour program. After the program, we report your hours to the North Carolina Bar for all North Carolina licensed attorneys. If you are a certified paralegal or licensed in another state, we can provide you with a certificate of attendance on your request. So that means for all North Carolina licensed attorneys who are seeking 2016 or 2017 compliance, you don't have any other requirement, we will report your hours for you. You should take a little appreciation, though, for the process, the timing. Sometimes, if we don't make this announcement clearly, attorneys email us on Monday and say they have looked on their online report, they don't see their hours. Well, the truth is, we have 30 days to report your hours, but we'll do it. But I assure you that Gabrielle will not take off a day until these reports are ready on Monday, and so they will be sent to the State Bar Monday. But the State Bar has, I think they have 3 people now. They used to only have 2 people who manually update everybody's records in the State Bar on the state of North Carolina and the certified paralegals, and so depending on the time of the year, they kind of get bogged down. You could imagine this would be that time of the year. But as long as you attend the course, you will be credited for your participation. And so it's not the nice streamlined process as you would expect for it to be. I don't make up the process, so I just mention it though, because sometimes, especially though if you've never taken the CLE before, you don't realize that there is not a automatic response to your online report. It will probably be about a month before you will see it on your online report. But that's outside of our control. So in any event, the course is offered live on January 28th, 2017. And if you're participating live with us today in the room with us, you can certainly raise your hand and ask your questions. And if you're on the webinar, you can hit the raise your hand button to ask your question audibly, or you can email your question and we'll read it and respond, or your comment as well. And we definitely appreciate your participation. All webinar attendees are muted, but that's to avoid background noise. We mentioned that the course is offered in real time, so therefore there's no limit on the number of hours you can take through this method of delivery. However, the course is also being recorded, and so if you are watching the course at a date other than January 28th, and you're watching at the time that you have selected, that's perfectly fine. It's just a cap of 6 hours of videos per year for the attorneys, okay? And actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, certified paralegals, they only have 6 hours as a requirement every year, and you actually can watch all videos for that. All right. Today, we'll talk about, we'll see how far we get. I think we start with nonprofits, then we move to for-profits, and there's some forms. I like to go through the forms, and some of them actually, well, almost all of them are at this point regular electronic submissions. And so I'll show you the actual form, but when you're doing it yourself, you'll do the online process, you'll never see the form. And in fact, some of the ones are hard to get, to tell you the truth, because there's just a link on a website, but I wanted to show you what it said in totality, and so we download the forms and send them to you. But just like the EIN, getting your employer identification number, I don't know anybody who doesn't submit through the online process now. It's actually very streamlined, and it actually will automatically give you back your EIN number. So if you're doing this for a company that wants to open up a bank account tomorrow, you literally could go online tonight and apply for the EIN, and it'll automatically pop it back to you. But I'm just saying it because I don't want it to be confusing, because I'm showing you hard copy Word documents and PDFs, but that's not necessarily what you're going to have to complete, but that's what it looks like, okay? All right. So we'll nonprofits are much more complicated and involved, and so we'll focus on that a little bit. Um, so what's the order of things? I start off by thinking about the first the first organization that I ever. Oh, forgive me. I'm actually trying to run this on two different computers. So if y'all see something that I'm talking about here that's not there, if you just remind me, that'd be great. It was fuzzy on this computer. I don't know what's going on, so it was better on this one. But anyway, so what's the order of things? And I thought about the first organization I ever did a nonprofit for. Um, it was a church. So the church comes and they want to meet with me always on a Sunday afternoon. But that's fine, 'cause that's when all the members were around, and so they'll come by the office and we'll discuss their nonprofit that they wanted to start. Okay. Um, and they want to, and so my process is, of course, I meet with them, I find out what their goals are, et cetera, to figure out how far they're on the process, what things do they want me to help with versus what things they're going to do on their own, because it impacts how much you charge them. Like if you want me to come to your meetings, I've had organizations that I will come to their meetings until they realize I was billing, and so they said don't come back anymore. But anyway, but you find out what they want from you, and so I give them a sample set of bylaws, the same set I've sent to you. I said, go through these bylaws and decide what you want. And then at the next, because it's kind of like I can't help be a professor sometimes. It's kind of like I'm giving you homework, but I'm like, come back. I said, schedule your next meeting when you finish going through these bylaws, so I will know what you want to put in your bylaws. So they come back for their next meeting. I say, so what did you guys think? They say, oh, your bylaws are fine. So me being me, I started to grill them about why they made certain decisions, and to therefore, because I knew they hadn't read the bylaws. Like you don't read a 20-page document and have no changes whatsoever, you know. And so I said, well, how many board of directors did you pick? Why did you pick that? What was the decision process like, you know? And they said, oh, well, we really hadn't read the bylaws. Lying to me after church. But anyway, and so initially I was going to do this. Regular, we call it a Form 10. I now call it a Form 1023. I really call it a 501c3 application, which if you Google it, that's what they call it. Um, and so I'm telling them about it. I'm telling them about budget projections we need to come up with, and bylaws, and non-discriminatory clauses on your website, et cetera, et cetera. And so they kept coming back and not coming back, and before the end, there was a whole new process created by the IRS. We call it the Form 1023 EZ, which is actually wonderful. And so when it came back the 700th time, and then I said, you know what, the IRS doesn't need to see your bylaws at this point, and they go, oh, that's great. No, 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 you still need bylaws. I'm just telling you I'm not going to submit them as an addendum to my application. And so when I began to discuss the prices with them, I mean, they were so like, well, that's not what you told us last time. I said, yes, because you waited so long. There's a whole new process. And the whole new process is actually much cheaper. And in fact, I mean, it went down twice. I'll tell you about the price in a second, but it went down twice because now it's gone down the additional time. And so what do you do first? That was one of the things that I wasn't clear about when I first started this process. I knew there was a state process and a federal process, and which starts first. Well, you start off with your regular state nonprofit application. Now, for your clients who Google this, they are going to insist to you that they paid their $60 to the North Carolina Secretary of State, and they filled out this page-and-a-half form with their name and address, and they're going to tell you they're a nonprofit. Okay? You're going to tell them you're a lawyer. They are not recognized by the federal government. How do you know that? Because the federal government has no idea that this form has ever been filed, right? Because where you file it? You file with the Secretary of State in Raleigh. They don't send a copy to the federal government. So there's no way you are federally recognized. But I assure you, and I had someone who was very upset with me because all he had was that $60. And I'm telling him it costs more than that to become recognized, but it's confusing. So again, we like to do what Google send first and know what we're up against. So you're gonna do that first, right? You're gonna do your nonprofit application with the state first. Um, you know what I didn't include for you? I didn't include the dissolution provision that you need to attach. So I'm going to send that to you because I forgot to. I just thought about that. I didn't include that because I downloaded the one from the states, but they want an attachment that discusses the dissolution of assets. Okay, and I forgot to include that. I just thought about that, but that is important because if you don't include that, they're going to send it back to you for one. It's also important. I mean, there's a law that says if if and when your nonprofit dissolves, where do the assets go? Anybody have an idea where that shit should go? To another nonprofit. And so you have to put in a statement that says that. And so that's the statement I'm going to get to you. But anyway, so that's your state process. It's just like filing, other than that addendum, other than that part, it's just like if you did an LLC for someone, and I included the LLC for you as well. I didn't include the INC because I'm yet to appreciate a reason why people still do that. I'm sure there's a reason, but the LLC is much more popular. So one of the things that I mentioned the order, one of the other things that my clients, you know, you have the client who halfway wants to hire you, so they've done a whole bunch of stuff by themselves. So you have a client who gets the EIN number before they do the state application. Well, what good is that EIN at this point? That's your employer. That's like your business and social security number, right? What good is that number? The problem for me is when I do the EIN, I'm going to say the name of the organization is ABC Foundation Incorporated, right? Because that's the name of it. Because I have gotten that name and I've submitted it with the Secretary of State. If you did the EIN first, your EIN number says ABC Foundation. It doesn't say ABC Foundation Incorporated, right? And so therefore, you need to do another EIN to get the right name, to get it all to match up. And so that's a waste of time to do it in the wrong order. And so and your clients won't know that. But you know that. So do it in that order. Get the state name first, file for the number, and then we're going to do the Form 1023, which is the 501c3 application for the nonprofit. Okay. Looking at the 1023-EZ versus the regular Form 1023. One of the big differences is how much it costs. When they first came out with this form, I think it was only 2 years ago. I think it was 2015. It was $400 as an application filing fee, okay? And the regular 1023 was $850. Now, let's see if I get this link to work. Probably not, but I'm going to go to it anyway because I want to show you something. Okay. Oh. No. Oh. Let me just make sure I get to the government site because I just want to show you something about how we do this. Hold on 1 second. I'm just pulling this up. Oh. See, I thought it was. Paste that. Oh, I forgot. Well, you guys in the room are going to be disadvantaged, but I'll tell you what it says. It actually, because your client's going to Google this, so I want you to know why they're saying this. I don't want you to think I was wrong. It actually says on the IRS website that it's $400. But it's not, okay? It's $275, and the rules of ethics don't allow me to keep that extra $125 the way I would like to, because I had a client to argue with me about that. He gave me the money he gave me the $400. He paid me for my services, and he paid the $400 filing fee. Well, it was ironic. Like right when I went to click submit, the fee went down to $275. So I mean, it was like the day before or something. He told it was 275. So I was like, oh my God, the fee went down. So I went ahead, submitted his application, everything right. So I called him. I'm like, hey, guess what? I owe you $125 back because the fee went down to 400 to 275. No, this website says it's 400. But for us being legal professionals, I would have taken that 125 and went and bought myself a pair of shoes. But you can't do that. It is 275. Okay. But it is true. That's why I was just showing you guys this. It literally says that on the IRS website that it's $400. There's another place on the website though that does say that it was reduced to 275. I think the reason it says this is because the 275 is a temporary reduction. So the price is $400, but for now it's like there's a sale on nonprofits, 275. And so that's why it says that. So I don't want your client telling you don't know what you're talking about because they know it's $400. Okay, so I did want to point that out. And it actually says something else wrong here too, because this is literally the IRS. You guys can't see it, but this is literally the IRS website I go to. I googled it before this presentation to make sure that it didn't change because it changes all the time, and so I wanted to make sure our numbers were right, and it was talking about fees not exceeding $10,000 over a 4-year period. That is not what the form says. The form says 50,000 over a 3-year period. This says 10,000 over a 4-year period. So today it's 50,000. In other words, if your client comes in as a new nonprofit, do they project that they're going to get more than $50,000 in a year and in the next 3 years? And if they project that they're going to get more than that, then they can't do the Form 1023-EZ. They have to do the full form. But this website says, the IRS website says 10,000, not 50,000. But when you get to the form, it actually says 50,000 over 3 years. And so I go with 50,000. But the other thing that I'll mention is that it's really designed, and we're going to get to some more of that in a minute, but it's really designed for new nonprofits, and so that's really what some of these rules are about. I had an organization that was a school, but they've existed for over 100 years. For some reason, they weren't a nonprofit, and so I was doing their nonprofit, and on one hand, it would be a new nonprofit, but it's taking over from a previous organization, and they generate like $30,000 a month in tuition as a private school. And so there's no way that they could project that they will bring less than 50,000. So that would be inappropriate. But for a truly new nonprofit, because I've had a lot of clients ask me this, how do I know what I'm going to generate, right? And then a lot of times, I know I have one that I'm working on now that they're creating a nonprofit because they have the inside track on a grant. The grant will be for $150,000, right? Well, do you have the grant? I mean, do you know you're going to get the grant? I have no problem doing the regular form. In fact, we get to charge more for doing the regular form, so I have an incentive to do the regular form. But they wanted to do the EZ form. And if you don't have any money in your bank account, then I don't know why I would project that you're going to make $50,000. I mean, because you haven't gotten a grant yet. I know plenty of groups that have inside tracks and never get anything. I mean, it's just how life is. They're competitive. So, and the other thing that I have no information about because it's so new, the question is, what if 3 years from now we look back and we've made hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we filed the EZ form? Well, first of all, the rules have only been in place for 2 years, so there's no way of knowing. There is no organization that has been in existence under this form for 3 years. But I think the worst thing that will happen based on an improper projection is you go back and you pay the rest of the filing fee. I think that's an appropriate remedy if you have inappropriately projected. So that's just my thought, but there's nothing no one knows that answer right now. So anyway, as we're getting started, we just talk about some common concerns when people are going to come to you and they're going to say, I want to do a nonprofit, and you're just going to talk with them and think through some things and figure out if that's the best thing for them. One of the questions that people have is about record keeping. Record keeping is important in any organization. At the same time, if you're seeking exemption from taxes, and that's your record keeping is more important. Record keeping for your board meetings, for example. How do you know you had a board meeting if there are no minutes? I don't know that a meeting existed unless there are minutes and there's a document that says these are the minutes. Financial record keeping as well is extraordinarily important because you are collecting other people's money, and we all know how important it is when we touch other people's money with our trust account, and we have to keep documentation of that. That's also really important. Some people ask me, do you have to have a CPA? The answer is no, you don't have to have a CPA. Although I will tell you that if you're really going to be competitive for certain grants, one of the things that a lot of the bigger organizations that give grants are looking for is an audit from what? A CPA. And so it depends on what you're doing with your nonprofit. Are you vying for those big grants? Then they may expect that. And so there are CPAs who give price breaks to nonprofits as well. So you will want to look at that. I know people who have their for-profit CPA and their nonprofit CPA because the prices are so different depending on what they're doing. Getting your leadership, getting your board members. What's the minimum number of board members you really need to have? Anybody? What's your minimum number of board members you're going to recommend? Again, these are recommendations to our clients. They can do what they want. What's your minimum you're going to recommend to them?
For a nonprofit? I would say 5 minimum.
Yeah, I was thinking 5 too.
In the room, in the room they're saying 5. What do you guys think on our webinar? What's your minimum number of board members you're going to recommend? What's your minimum number? And it's one question to say what I guess I really wanted to ask, well, how many must you have? Then we could talk about how many should you have. I'm seeing 3s and 5s, and I'm going to, and then someone says make sure it's an odd number, and I'm not going to do it, but I'm probably not going to do it if you don't have 3. I'm looking for 3, and then you can have as many more as you want, but I'm looking for 3 minimum, and I also want the odd number. But truthfully, like I try to not tell you what to do because I'm advising you about legal stuff. If your organization is legally structured properly, but just a general hot mess, then that's not my issue. If your nonprofit objective is something I think is stupid, that's not my business. That have nothing to do with that. And so I'm trying to give them the latitude because of their organization, not mine. But I do say my minimum that you must have is 3. And then if you tell me you have 20, I have one that just gave me a list of like 17. I mean, whatever you want to do, knock yourself out. It just takes me extra time typing all the names and addresses on the application, but that's fine. I don't mind doing that. Who can get paid? Big question. Who can get paid? And I've seen some very established boards get this answer wrong, actually because they were being too cautious. And it's okay if you make a decision that way about being cautious, but it's another thing to misunderstand what the law says. Like, I'm going to tell you what the law says, and you decide what is the best thing for your organization. I had this board that there was this person on the board who was going to be able to generate some grant money, significant grant money, and she wanted, because she was going to basically get paid out of the grant for the work that she was doing, and she was a board member. The board voted her off the board because they didn't want a conflict. Okay, that's a choice, but the way they pitched it was we have no choice. What's the real answer to that question, though? Could they pay this board member? Because in the end, the truth is, the way this woman was connected to this grant, the grant was going to follow her. Okay, she's the reason that whoever was going to get the grant. And so if they didn't have her on the board anymore, they weren't going to get the grant. So from a legal advice standpoint, what could they have done to have still paid this board member? Or is that even possible? Can you possibly pay a board member for a nonprofit? And everyone in the room is saying it is possible.
If the board member follows the duty of loyalty.
Yeah, well, he said it's a board member follows the duty of loyalty, but also, go ahead, go ahead.
I think you just need to make sure that the board member isn't getting any favors that somebody outside of the board would not have gotten. As far as like, if you got to make sure that the amount that the person is getting paid is the same amount that a regular person outside
Okay.
has gotten paid.
All right. One person says what you want to do is make sure that the board member is being treated like anybody else who would have gotten that position. In essence, this person is going to be like some mini director for that particular grant. So are they getting paid more than the standard rate for this position, for example? The other thing I was going to say was when we vote, because we as a board still have to agree, when we vote on this person getting paid and whatever, the person shouldn't be in the room. Just that simple. If we have 17 members on our board, well, she needs to step out. We have a conversation, and we decide as a board that we are going to pay her this money. Then she can come back in. And so that's one of the ways that I want to avoid the conflict of interest. So that's a way of doing that. And now, again, that is the legal advice, because the question wasn't posed. The question, when it came to me, it was after the fact. We kicked her out of the board because we can't have that. No, if you don't want to have that, then that's perfectly fine. There are organizations that I know that have a rule that you simply just don't do that. If you either get off the board and we'll pay you, or you stay on the board. And I understand that, and that's completely their prerogative, okay? So my job, again, is to make sure that you understand, come to me with your objective, and I'm going to help you meet your objective. Is your objective have her to be a board member and to pay her? Well, this is how we're going to do it, and so let me run some numbers to see what this person gets paid, and yada, yada. Anybody have an idea of the highest paid, I don't want to say the name of the organization, but what's a dollar amount if you run a national, potentially international nonprofit? How much you think that you get paid? I mean, big time nonprofits. Give me an idea of that salary.
I think there's got to be some people getting into millions of dollars. You have to look at the market around you. How hard was it to attract someone of your caliber to the position?
He says it's in the millions, and you're looking at similarly situated people and what they're getting paid. And so if you look at other national and international nonprofits, and the person who has the experience level to run that gets paid $5 million, then you can pay your board member, your executive director $5 million. That's exactly correct. And it is in the millions. I was surprised that when I learned that one day as well, that literally millions of dollars you're making from a nonprofit, which in my mind seemed weird, but at the same time, I, at this moment, don't have the skill set to generate the money they're generating. I said this time. But once you have the ability to do that, your worth increases. And so it's not you must be poor because you work for a nonprofit. It's, well, what do people get paid for this position? So that's kind of how we as lawyers are going to help our clients navigate these questions, because they're going to ask us, well, can I pay them their asking salary? So then I'm just going to start looking around and see what other groups are paying their directors or whatever. And if it's in line, then it's fine.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Just briefly. When you fill out the 1023, I don't know if it's on the easy, but I know on the regular one it does ask about your board of well, it asks about your board of directors, and then it asks what's the highest compensated board of director.
Right.
Now on that form you can put that the nonprofit is paying the board member at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, her question is, and you're right, it's not, I don't think it's on the easy, but on the regular 1023, it does ask that question about, it asks you to identify your highest paid, it asks about highest paid several different staff persons, right? Mm-hmm. And so she says, is that where you disclose that? And the answer is yes. The other thing, though, that you know on your 1023 is it addresses your conflict of interest policy. And so those go in tandem. And so you have a conflicts of interest policy that you've already established that your board has voted on. And so therefore that is how you can articulate the fact that this salary is okay because it went through my conflict of interest policy. So yeah, that's where you would disclose that. So then the question is, who can get paid? Can we pay anybody can get paid as long as they've gone through the conflict of interest process. And of course, one of the good things about going through the regular 1023 application is that you actually have to disclose all of that to the federal government, and they're going to read it and make sure that it's correct. And so that's kind of nice. It's kind of like, a free oversight, well, not free, you pay $800, but pay 50, but I mean, it's, relatively good to get some sort of preliminary opinion, like this conflict in the policy is inappropriate, or, so you can get back some feedback. Can we have a preference for who we benefit or serve? Is it deemed discrimination? This is a big one. And it's actually not as, I was trying to find the right wording because it sounds worse than what it says. The example is, the church comes in and they say, in our bylaws, can we say in order to be a member of our board, you have to be a member of the church? Can you do that? No, you can't do that. You can't have a religious test for board membership. I did say, however, I said if that's something, if I said I know it, you can't say you must love Jesus to be on my board, okay? But let's look at what is your goal globally? Is your goal to make sure that people have the same objectives, morality, things of that nature? So you can say that. You see, you can put a morals clause in for your board members. You just can't put anything that would in any other context be discrimination. Religion, race. You can't put those sort of things there because that is what we call discriminatory, but you can look at a global way of achieving your objective. Another thing that a foundation asked about that is, it is what it is. It was a group of similarly situated people, and it can be similarly situated because we're all Christians, we're all men, we're all black, whatever the similar thing that we have, we want to raise money to thereby generate and help similarly situated people. So we're all Jewish, and we want to give money to Jewish children. We're all men, and we want to give money to boys. We're all black, and want to give money to black people. You see? So can you do that? And the answer is still no. You cannot say that. Now, I had this one example. This lady, she was a minister of a church, and she says, "Can my nonprofit only give scholarships to members of my church?" Listen to this, and this sounds bad, and I hate to have to answer this question, but I mean it's the truth. It's the right answer. She said, "Can I give a scholarship and say only members of my church can apply for the scholarship?" I really hate to say this, but I said no, but nobody said you got to put the application anywhere else, right? I mean, if you have a scholarship and the applications happen to be sitting at Jones Chapel Baptist Church, and only the people at Jones Chapel Baptist Church happen to get one, then that's how it is, okay? But because the reality is, and I really thought this through because I really want to make sure I gave the right answer. Because the reality is, you might be a pastor of this church, but is the church not open to the public? If the application is sitting in the vestibule, can anybody not walk in and get one? Right?
Yeah.
And what stops me from being a member of that church, getting that application, and bringing it to somebody else? Right? And so I said, that's the answer. That was the legitimate answer, is you can achieve your same objective as long as you're not announcing discrimination. And I think that if it had been for a bad reason, I think I probably would have thought of a different answer. Like if you were really doing something bad, like you're racist or crazy or something. But I mean, that was just legal advice. Like, yes, you can do that. But I really do think that I've seen a lot of people really hesitate about that. The other thing that people hesitate about, and my favorite example of this is when Jesse Jackson was kicked off of the Rainbow Push Coalition. Yeah, I remember that when he was about to protest George Bush's inauguration. I'm not saying that was why, but in any event, it's what happened. Jesse Jackson formed a nonprofit many years ago, and in the midst of controversy, his board kicked him out. How does that happen? Well, the board votes. That's how it happens. Okay, and that's the reality of it. A lot of people don't want to form a nonprofit for that reason alone. Because I birthed an organization, and that organization now is outside of my control. It's actually controlled by the board members, right? And so people really struggle with that because the truth is now, if you set up your nonprofit correctly, there is no way around that. You can create a nonprofit, put your heart and soul into it, and get voted out of it. That is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, you have the second question on the slide is who owns the
Oh,
nonprofit.
and that's exactly what I was. I'm glad you shared that. That's what I was.
So if Jesse Jackson had retained 100% ownership of the nonprofit, he would just put himself back on.
Yeah. His question was, what if Jesse Jackson had retained 100% ownership of the nonprofit? I'm so glad you raised that because I actually forgot that slide, that point was there, because that's what I meant. That's what I'm going to talk about. He can't. You can't own the nonprofit. That's the difference. If it's a for-profit business, you can own it. You can sell it. You can own part of it. All those things that we're accustomed to in for-profit businesses. You cannot maintain ownership of a nonprofit. Caveat, you can help him maintain assets of the nonprofit. That might be something to think about.
Own the building.
He can. There you go. He can own the building. He can own the land that the nonprofit operates on, and they can sign a rental agreement with him. It really does take some forethought because I'm concerned about that for people that I've helped to birth nonprofits because as lawyers we go worst case scenario all the time. Okay, but that's our jobs. That's what we're paid for. People don't pay us when things are going well. They pay us when there's a problem, and when there's a problem, we should have thought about it ahead of time. And so I am concerned about people who come to me who birthed a nonprofit and being kicked out of it. And I first tell them you can't own it. However, you can own assets that the nonprofit works with. There was a nonprofit that I know about that the executive director had made all kinds of loans to the nonprofit, so they owed her a lot of money. Is there anything wrong with that? Not on its face. As a lawyer, I'm going to make sure that there is a contract, a promissory note, or something that consummates this agreement, and that the board voted on it because if she's getting interest or something like that. But I feel like I'm being inappropriate by saying these things, but it's the law. If she had a promissory note that she could call the note, you know what I'm talking about? Meaning that she could say, all this money is due right now. You can accelerate the debt, the indebtedness. Well, wouldn't that give her some ability to not get kicked off of that board, to not be fired? I mean, I don't know why I feel inappropriate right now, but it doesn't sound right. But I mean, our job is to give clients strategies. Okay, so she did that, I wasn't involved in that. I only know about it, but when I thought about it, I thought that's smart because the board was not going to kick her out because they knew when they kicked her out, then she was going to shut them down. You owe me $100,000. I want my money tomorrow. You see? Let me move on from that. Okay, what is the real benefit of the nonprofit? I think the answer is pretty consistent, but I do want to make sure that my clients have an objective in mind, especially churches, though, because churches are that quasi-type nonprofit where the money I donate to the church is already tax deductible, and so what is your goal here? Almost always, what is their goal? I put it in 2 words: free money. They're applying for grants. Now that's a legitimate objective for a nonprofit. It's the thing that you're already doing. I have this group I work with who does a turkey giveaway. Okay, every year, and it's very big in the town that they do it in. They give, I mean, everybody gets a turkey, and so they wanted to get money from other organizations. They wanted Food Line, for example, or some grocery store was going to donate to them a bunch of turkeys for their turkey giveaway, but they didn't have a 501c3. And so they decided to form a 501c3, and it was work because the question is you got to do a cost benefit analysis. You know, you can't just form the organization for purposes of getting your turkeys and that's it. I need you to you got to have board meetings now. You got to go through a process. And so if it's ultimately worth it for you, then that's the kind of thing I talk with my clients about. Is it worth it for you to go through this process to form this nonprofit? And because it's going to cost you this much to filing fees, it's going to cost you're going to have to fill out certain tax forms that you're going to have to fill out for the church. And so you're going to have board members who have meetings. And if it's just for free turkeys, then that's probably not enough, you know? So those are some considerations to see on that. Okay. Okay. Next is, hey, you're an attorney. Can you serve on my board? I don't know what I did that caused this to start happening, but I have gotten so many invitations to be a board member. I can't even explain. And at first I was so flattered, you know. And then it's very, very quickly I realized you were not looking for a board member, you were looking for a free lawyer. And because you weren't asking me the question that other board members are being asked, and the board meeting you turned to me for legal advice. Well, see, that's how I get paid. That's how I feed my children. So that's different. That's not. I do more than my fair share of volunteering, you know. And so it actually takes a little bit of effort for us to explain that. I was on the North Carolina Foundation for Public School Children. I was on that board for years, but we had an attorney, you see, and no one ever asked me legal advice on that board. I was there to raise money for school children. And so I was a fundraiser committee chair. We had the annual gala. So I would come to the board meeting, and I didn't have to have a law license. I would say, okay, this is who I invited to speak at the gala. You see, that's different. That's me volunteering and serving the community. Nowadays, people come to me and ask me to be on their board because they want to know what to do about legal matters. And so my suggestion is to have that very specific conversation with someone who actually work with their board. Because if you want to give that board free legal advice, then that's fine. But you have to make sure that you have established that relationship. Are you willing to give the board a free legal advice every board meeting, but then that's it? What can they call on you, for example, if they call on you outside of the board meeting, are they going to pay you a reduced consultation fee for that, right? But inside the board meeting, you got 1 hour, go, you know? So that's just something I would encourage you to think about, because it really, for one, it falls right under the conflicts of interest issue, right? Because if you're a board member and then you're telling them to pay you, well, how can you do that? Well, we already answered that question, didn't we? You can be paid as a board member, although most attorneys who are going to give advice to boards actually, to make it clean and simple, break that up, because it is kind of weird for you to be paid to prepare the conflicts of interest policy so that you understand how weird that looks? Like you're being paid to write a conflicts policy so that you ultimately can't get paid. So most attorneys make a delineation. I'm going to serve, you are my client, you don't pay me, you pay me, and you make it clean that way. So just a thought there. Can we serve as fiscal agents for others? And I was trying to figure out the layperson way of saying this, but I don't know, I've been a lawyer too long. But this is what I mean, and I created a nonprofit myself, okay? Before I did that, I still raise money for the groups I want to raise money for. Like I would go to businesses and say, "Can you donate money? Or we're raising money for this high school scholarship program." What I would do is I would have them to write the check to this other nonprofit, and when it was time for the money to go where it was supposed to go, that other nonprofit wrote the checks. That's called being a fiscal agent. So I would raise $10,000, and all the money would be given to this nonprofit, and the nonprofit would turn around and write checks for $10,000 to the schools, to the kids, where the money was supposed to go. And I think, and I only mention that because it's completely appropriate, and some people think it's not, so I'll mention that to you. Now, of course, there's a risk involved because one of my things that I tell every business client that I ever have had, I say, even good people have misunderstandings, okay, and that's important. So when I go to document stuff, it is not because I don't trust you, because I have seen for over a decade, good people have misunderstanding. It was two good people, and this nonprofit thought I was raising that $10,000 to give to them to keep it, when I wasn't. I was raising this money so that they could then take it and spin it back around and give it to the place I said to give it to. I know fairly big organizations that do this because they have a nonprofit arm. You know, I don't think it's a secret, so I can tell you, like the North Carolina Associate of Educators, that's not a nonprofit because they engage in lobbying and they're apparently very influential other than when a Republican is governor. And so there is a nonprofit wing of that that's, of course, a separately run organization. And so because the NCAE is definitely not a nonprofit, they raise money and they give the money to that nonprofit, and that's how they divvy out their scholarships. They just do the same thing I was saying on a much bigger scale. But you have, as you as the attorney, your client comes to you and says that, what are you going to say? I need to prepare a memorandum of understanding about this, right? Because our accountant needs to tag this money for that purpose, and I need to be able to show that this money came in, it's going to go right back out. And it's dollar for dollar, although, quite frankly, I think that an administrative fee is appropriate, but you put that inside of your agreement. You know, because it is a little bit of work on behalf of the nonprofit, right? If I donate, I give $10,000 to you, you should probably give me a couple $100 for doing this for you, right? So as long as the objectives are nonprofit related, it's appropriate. That's a big caveat, of course. As long as the objective is nonprofit related, I can't give you $10,000 to say I donate to a nonprofit, then you give it back to me as a check for my legal services. You know, that's not appropriate. It has to all be for that same nonprofit objective. Any question about that? Okay. But I really have been encouraging some people to do that. Someone online guessed $1 million too. I have really been encouraging because there was like a family wanted to. This a real example is a family that came to me and said we want to give a $500 scholarship to a child who goes to this high school every year in honor of our mother. Okay, that's a beautiful, wonderful thing to do. Honor the legacy of your mother. Is it going to be tax deductible? No. How can I make it tax deductible? Well, I can file a nonprofit for you, but it seems like that's probably not the best usage of your time if the only thing you wanted to do is do a $500 scholarship each year, right? You're not going to raise money. You're not going to apply for grants. You just want to come to the high school, give the kid a scholarship, and that be the end of it. That, to me, is a perfect example of when I, as the attorney, would prepare an agreement for someone to be your fiscal agent. Write a check to the nonprofit, let the nonprofit write a check to the kid, you get the tax benefit, and everything's fine. Okay? All right. IRS code is where we're going to find the information about the nonprofit because we're really focused on the federal rules. The state rules are pretty easy to follow. The only other state rule that I was concerned about you following was the solicitation application, and I attached that for you as well. But it's also I attached the a PDF of the solicitation form, but it's also you can do it online. Now, the funny thing about that one, though, is you can do the solicitation application online, but you still have to mail in a notarized copy of your signature page. So it's not so online, but I actually didn't know that the first time I did it. I thought I was being clever by filling this online application, and when I finished it and it said, we're not going to process until you mail us in this form, I mean, I could have mailed in a whole form, but anyway. So you will want to do your solicitation application for your clients, or even, well, I take that back. I think I would do that for my clients. There's some of the stuff that I will not do because I want them to go to someone else, because it's how far am I willing to go down the road of being your accountant, or your business manager? And so you have to make that decision for yourself. I know some lawyers are much better at numbers than I am, and there's another form about exemptions from filing income tax returns and stuff, and I'm definitely not doing that for them. I mean, I'll tell them that needs to be done, and I hope you have a tax preparer for that, or your CPA is going to do it. But my extent of involvement in that is to tell them that needs to be done. I included that for you, but that's a form that I think is too much related to their day-to-day inner workings, and I don't think it's prudent to pay me to be in your day-to-day inner workings, quite frankly. I think that it's prudent to line up when you need legal services. Some lawyers are better businessmen than I, and so they perhaps have figured out why not just sit in the meeting and get in and bill for it. And I understand that concept, but I used to go to this nonprofit every meeting they had every month. I would go, and then I realized, I mean, I don't need to sit through a conversation about the fundraiser you're going to have, as long as they're not illegal, fundraisers. That's really not involving me. So after that, I said to them, why don't you can send me the minutes of your meeting, and I can look through those much faster than being at your whole meeting. And then if I see something that's a problem, I'll mention it. But or you have a legal question, and so but I know attorneys who go to every meeting and they do quite well. So perhaps I missed the ball on that one. But you do want to make sure that you've established that as part of your relationship. But there are a lot of good forms. I mean, the good thing about forms is, even though it's probably frustrating, but like I believe that 1023 EZ is like, I think it's like 3 or 4 pages, maybe it's 5 at best. But because of the IRS, the instruction page is 21 pages. So that is good and it's bad. It's the kind of thing I feel like, of course, this is an introductory course, and of course we'll come back later on and go more in depth on everything, but especially with the short form, what we call it a streamline application, with that, I think with a little bit of guidance, you can work your way through that with a client, because you have a document that explains the instructions, and so that's good. And not that you want to be in this position, but whenever you file the particularly long form, the IRS routinely contacts you back with follow-ups. And so it's not that life or death. You don't want to do something wrong, but if you say your budget projections were not thorough enough, the IRS will actually contact you back and say, please provide more information about your budget projections. And that's how you know you need to give more information about your budget projections, you see? So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely, I would want you to have some guidance about it, but I think it's something to not necessarily shy away from, as long as you understand the overall structure and you have some guidance. What kind of nonprofits? We always refer to the 501c3 because that's the most popular. If you are going to engage in lobbying efforts, though, dealing with social welfare issues, and 501c4 is what you would actually do. Chambers of Commerce, there are 501c6s, social and recreational clubs, 7, And so because 501c3 is the most common because it's the broadest one as well. As long as you're not looking into like partisan political activity, then I go under the 501c3. And since I mentioned partisan political activity, can the nonprofit register voters? What do you guys think? Can your nonprofit engage in voter registration?
Yes.
Yes.
All of those,
Yes. Yes, you can register voters. I think this question will come later in the PowerPoint, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. Can you have a voter awareness forum? Somebody getting more uncomfortable now? So you all were good with the registration. Can you have a political awareness forum?
If it's neutral.
Yes, if it's neutral. I mean, neutral, I guess, is the right word.
Nonpartisan.
You invite all the candidates, basically. You invite all the candidates. Now, this is a place. Now, I help my clients come up with strategy, but this one I wouldn't do. Client says, I'm going to invite all the candidates, but I'm going to give the Democrats 2 months' notice, and I'm going to call the Republicans the day before. No, that is inappropriate. I would like, if you're going to engage in this process, I would like for you to show me how you treated everyone the same. Not just send the invitation to them at the same time, but at the program, how have you structured it so that everyone gets equal speaking time? I would like to know that. Like, that's part of me giving the legal advice. You know, you can't give the Democrat more time to speak than a Republican or whatever. You know, I actually do delve into that with them because I don't want them to lose their status about that. And you know, I have seen people try to wink on this, and I am not okay with that. As a lawyer, as a former candidate, I saw it as well, and it's not. I think that that's a place that you really should not wink. I'm okay with you leaving, dropping off applications at your church vestibule. That's different than getting into politics and not doing it right. I think that level is much higher. You can really lose your status by doing that. So I would actually make sure my client is really dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's with it. I really would expect to see formal invitations for everybody dated for the same time period. Yes.
just briefly, are the other Cs, 4 through 7, are they tax advantaged the way the C3 is?
Yes, the question was, are the other ones, do they receive the same tax benefits? Now, there are nuanced differences, particularly with private foundations, that's something I will refer them to a CPA to get a clarity on what those nuanced differences are. But as far as do they all have federal recognition as nonprofit, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. They all, because that's the whole point of this exercise, is to get the federal recognition. And so one of the things that you'll find, I just mentioned one thing you'll find is if you have an organization that, and I have at least one that I work with that actively engages in attempts to influence policy. That's one of the things that a 501c3 cannot do, okay? But a 501c4 can. And so one of the things that they're doing is they're earmarking their monies, you know? If I write a check for $500, I'm going to tell them I will have 100 that's going to go towards lobbying against abortion, and the other 400 go towards your scholarship program. You see, and so that's something that's part of the burden they have. As a 501c3, we have 3 main objectives that our organization does. We engage in scholarship, blah blah blah, whatever, and so people can still earmark money, but it's all treated the same as far as tax purposes. So that's one of the differences. All right, what is the main advantage to forming the 501c3? Contributions are deductible as charitable contributions from federal income tax returns, and many foundations provide grants, and they want to see that specifically. Okay. And the other thing that I think we should be clear is that your 501c3 has a nonprofit objective, and it can have many objectives. One of the things that I was talking to a group about that was doing a long form was they said, well, what we basically know the kind of stuff we want to do, but we're not 100% sure if that's going to evolve, right? Which is fair. I don't know what I'm going to do 5 years from now, And so they want, but in essence, they don't want to have to come back and pay me to amend the documents 5 years from now. So I said, okay. I said, pick broad and pick a lot. And under the application, name everything that you could possibly think you want to do. If you could possibly want to do this type of thing, then go ahead and say that. You may never do it, because you may need a certain amount of money to build a school, and your organization has $10. I understand that. But go ahead and say you want to build a school inside of your application so that's encompassing in your objectives. So that's it. There's nothing wrong with doing the overly broad. I actually don't believe there's anything wrong with adding new nonprofit objectives as long as they're not completely unrelated to the original purpose and as long as they fall within the guise of nonprofits. But it's much cleaner because it's much cleaner for you to pick as broad as possible as you get started. Because a lot of times you're going to have people who just have a heart to serve, and they're going to come to you with no. I had a lady, she was the sweetest young lady. She had no idea about how to start anything. All she knew was that she was having events in the community. It was something about mother-son dances and mothers being more active and learning how to raise men because there weren't fathers or something. And she just, all she knew was, I want to do good. Well, I mean, I set her up with a mentor to talk to her about what she needed to do because I'm a lawyer, and what you should do is come to me when you're ready to do the actual thing. I don't know what the thing is, and I'm not good at helping you figure that out, which is not, I mean, it's not what I'm supposed to do. You come to me when you know what you're going to do, and I'm going to help you achieve your objective. But you will get people who just want to do good, and that's good. We need more people like that. And of course, we're going to make sure that if they have any activities that are not for the nonprofit purpose, they won't do them. That sounds very simple. But I'll tell you what I'm really getting at. A lot of my clients have two entities, right? Because they come to me and I'm like, I need to know what you want to do because I'm in the business of helping you achieve your objective. I'm not in the business of defining your objective. What do you want to do? I want to do these 5 things. Okay, well, 4 of those things fit neatly under a nonprofit, and that 5th one does not. So you can do an LLC for that and a nonprofit for the other 4. So now I got to charge you for both, you see? So it works out for all of us. But it is important for you to make sure your client understands that. And so when you're in the process of preparing their nonprofit, you prepare their LLC and anything that goes along with that. Because some other legal service that you might want to consider providing to your client are what licensing requirements are out there for that organization, right? For the nonprofit, but more so for the for-profit, you want to look at licenses. And I think the first business I ever worked with wanted to have a home-based catering company. Well, somebody out there probably already caught the problem with that, which is what? I then looked up law and found out that the rules say that you can't have a home-based catering company because you have to have a commercial-grade kitchen. And so we went through a process of figuring out how to get him a commercial-grade kitchen for the cheapest amount possible, but that was part of my legal service because he didn't know. He thought he could fill out his own residential kitchen and sell it and be licensed, and you can't. You have to, but it's actually not as hard as you think. It's just you have to go through the process of not being your primary residence, and even I almost had crafted an exception to this rule about the residents if you had 2 kitchens in your house. If you had 2 kitchens and one of them was a commercial kitchen, the other one could be a residential kitchen. But anyway, but that's what you're supposed to do for your clients, though. For our business clients, I tell my clients, You should know how to generate income for-profit companies, You should know how to generate income. I'm going to do the legal stuff so that you are free to generate the income, right? You know how to make quilts. I'm not going to tell you how to make quilts. I'm not going to tell you how much to sell the quilts for. I'm not going to tell you how to market the quilts. What I will tell you is, if we're going to contract with someone to sell your quilts in their store, I'm going to have a written agreement so that all the scenarios that we can possibly contemplate have been dealt with. If they don't sell your quilts, do you get them back? Well, they spilled something on your quilts. I can deal with all of that, but I will never, ever help you make a quilt. And so that's us defining our legal services for our clients. But here we're talking about specific dissolution provisions. We talked about that. And one of the first times when I did this, my client, and I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that, but he wanted to name the nonprofit ahead of time. That he was going to give his stuff to if his organization ever dissolved. The only reason, I didn't say I didn't let him, but the only reason that I discouraged that is because how do you know that that nonprofit is not going to dissolve before yours? So what you can say in the article that we submit to the state is that you're going to provide your assets to another nonprofit. What you can say in your bylaws is that you expect that nonprofit to be XYZ nonprofit unless they don't exist anymore. And if they don't exist anymore, then it can go somewhere else. Well, that's how I expect to handle that, but that's us advising our clients on how to deal with that. Okay. All right. Sorry, I keep missing your comments until I moved on the webinar. Someone had acknowledged that you can certainly do all the political activity you want as long as it's nonpartisan. So thank you for chiming in with that. Having your clients to determine a mission statement is important. It does get into some of the day-to-day workings that I want you to avoid, but it also deals with making sure that they're not doing things that are outside of the purview of the nonprofit. That's why it's on your list, okay? Because I want to make sure that they're not doing things that are outside that purview, okay? So that's why I want you to talk to your clients about their mission statement. They should know that certain information that they prepare is open to public inspection. And so if you have a person who doesn't want everyone to know that he's on your board, see, I'm going to tell you how to deal with that too, but it can't be done in bad faith, okay? This guy, I don't know, let's say he's famous. And for whatever reason, whatever fame he has, he wants it to be private about which boards he's on. Well, when I do the initial application, I list all the board members. So how do I get around listing him? In good faith, mind you, because you can't do it in bad faith. But in good faith, what happens? Let me ask you this. When you submit your initial application, you identify board members. Do you think that we're going back and redoing our application when we add a board member? No, we're not. I'm not saying to do this in a bad faith way. I'm talking about he has a legitimate reason. You know, if President Obama, I guess I should say, former President Obama, said he wants to join your board because he wants to meet with you guys 4 times a year, help you have advice about how to navigate the board and give you ideas and stuff. He doesn't want everybody knowing he's on your board just because maybe the logical reason will be then everybody else is going to say, oh, he can be on board now. Hey, be on my board, right? But he wants to be on your board. So don't put him on your board until you've gone through this process. I think that's bad faith. Let's think about that before anybody tells on me. Is that bad faith to do it that way? Because as I'm thinking out loud, it doesn't sound like bad faith. What do you guys think? He's not on your board. He literally can't be on your board first. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, it's possible you might change the time. You might decide not to be on the board.
It's possibly to change his mind not to sign me on a board, right? So you have an official moment where you vote on board members, and then you vote on him. It happens to be after you've done the application. I just like I had a board that gave me 17 board members, okay, names and addresses put on the form. You know what? And I didn't do this, to be very clear, but I thought to myself, why not just list the first five and be done with it? I mean, like then after this, I mean, because the form, the easy form only has room for five. You have to do a whole little thing to add the other 12. So it's like a pain, okay? It's almost like if I just put these five here, then I come back later and say, okay, all 17 of you on the board, yay. But that was inappropriate because they had already decided these 17 members were board members. And so for that reason, they had already made the decision before they came to me. Mind you, this is the group that I say you need at least three, and they came to me with 17. But again, I don't, run the organization. So we talked about, and again, I attached the easy form, but that one is done completely online. What I've done, and if I would love to get a suggestion on how to do this, because I think I might not do it this way again because I don't get the information. For the easy form that you do online, it asks for contact information, and I've been putting my client's contact information. Like the first couple times I did it, like I'm working through the form, and I'm thinking, like, with the regular form, there is a actual additional form that you use to say, I'm the lawyer, contact me, For the EZ, the first time I'm working through it, and again, I'm doing it online, and so I know what it says, but in my head, I remember thinking there was a place to put my information. So I'm going through the form. It's asking for who is the contact. I'm putting the person who's on the board, and I'm going through the application. When I finish the whole thing and I hit submit, I'm like, wait a minute. Like a couple of days later, it occurred to me, I didn't put any of my information there. Like I put her email address, I put her mailing address, I put her phone number because I was expecting that at the end for it to say, okay, who's your attorney, like the regular form does, but it doesn't. So I woke up in the middle of the night and said, wait a minute. How am I going to know when this has been done? I mean, I know I submitted it, but how do I know it's been approved? So I had to call the client and say, look, I put all your information on this form, so I'm not going to know when it's been processed. You'll need to tell me. And the client didn't even bother to tell me that the form has been approved? I mean, y'all know we don't get contact unless something's wrong. Yeah, if it had been denied, then I would have gotten all kinds of phone calls. But in the future, when I do the online version, I think I didn't want to necessarily be the permanent person the IRS was going to contact, because it didn't seem like that was necessary. But now I am going to put my own information down because that's the only way that I'm going to know what's going on with the application. And I think it's appropriate for them to contact me if there's an issue. So I will throw that out there as far as that's concerned, because that's very unusual, because most of the time when you're doing a document as a lawyer and it's a legal document, there is a place for you to put your name. There's a place you put your client's name and your name, like on the regular one, but it's not on the short form. So I did want to mention that. So the articles, again, that's something pretty straightforward. For the bylaws, does anyone read the bylaws? Well, you come through my office, you will, because I grill you about them. But I think it's important. I don't want people to take my bylaws and say, yeah, they're great, because that's not. You should have the exercise in your own organization. And I tell you what I should do, which would be a win-win for me. I should say, let me come to your meeting and let's work through these 10 pages of bylaws together. Because now I know you've done it, but now I've spent 5 hours of my billable time. So which one do you prefer? I think I'll pitch it that way next time. Which one do you prefer? I'll come to your meeting and I'll spend $1,000, 5 hours, on your bylaws, or you can do it yourself. Because it is important, because it speaks to the structure of your organization. It speaks to the seriousness of what you're engaging in. And then who cares if you follow the bylaws? Again, our experience is when there are problems. And I know an organization I work with right now that did not have a clear provision about how to kick board members off. That's a problem. Because one of the board members went, what was it? It was like a home for, let's say, veterans, okay? So one of the board members goes and opens up another home for veterans in a neighboring county. So they contact me as a new board member slash provide free legal advice. And I, first of all, where's your conflict policy for board members? How about that? How about we don't want board members competing with our organization. Well, it's too late now. It's not there. I said, I can prepare a document that the new board members can sign. Well, that guy, he got you. He got you. Because the reality is, and this is terrible, but this is what happened. According to these people I was speaking with, they now believe, and it may have been true, he only joined their board for purposes of getting access to all of the inside information. Every time there was a grant, we discussed at the board meetings. Every connection that we had to help us get the grants, every strategy that we had to be successful, we discussed them at the board meetings. He used all that information to go form the exact same thing down the street. And there was nothing they could do about it because they didn't have a conflict policy for their own board members. You think of conflict policies to be a direct conflict of interest. What about a covenant not to compete, though? What about a regular old covenant not to compete? If you think nonprofits are competitive, you're wrong. I have been a part of litigation where I almost said their name, but where one organization branched off and formed another organization, and so now you have two organizations who are doing the same nonprofit activity, and it sounds innocent enough, but the truth is there's almost so much money to go around, people. Okay, I know that when my organization, my nonprofit that I created, announced a 5K that we were doing, another nonprofit that I was talking to sent an email and a listserv that I'm on, and they said, hey, we're thinking about having a 5K. And they mentioned it the week before mine. And the thing is, in the community I live in, we don't have enough people to do 2 5Ks week by week. You know, we are doing everything we can to get participation in this 5K. And so people are going to pick our 5K or their 5K. And we literally were both doing it for high school scholarships. And so I say that to say that you think your business advice is different because it's a nonprofit. It's not. I want that money as bad as they do, even though it's not going in my pocket. I want that scholarship money, okay? And so it's the same thing as if you stole a client from my law firm. I want it. I might want it for a different reason, but I still want it, so the business advice actually becomes the same. I now have a covenant not to compete with my board members. You're not going to take my ideas and go use them. You're not going to do that, okay? Because there's only but so much money out there, and I would like for my group to get it because I think we do good work. So that's why your client is going to laugh like, oh, bylaws, ha, 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 but it's not funny. Because whenever there's a problem, and they hadn't kicked this guy off the board because the bylaw said to write him a letter to do this and to do that, and they hadn't done it, well, he's still on the board. He can come back and vote you as executive director out. You see? In fact, he was the chair of the board. And so that's why we're going to push our organization to follow the bylaws. I know it feels overwhelming to them to do that sort of stuff, but we're going to identify only the key provisions and say, let's make sure that I know who the board members are. If you violate the attendance policy, whatever rule that you had established, let's make sure that we have a record of that. I do want to read their minutes. That's how I know they have meetings, right? I do want to help them keep corporate records. I do, when they tell me that they have a policy, guess what? It is not unreasonable for them to have it in writing. And one of the things I'm trying to make sure that we zero in on is your for-profit businesses you advise your nonprofit businesses to have the same level of sophistication, right? It's not a lower level because they're a nonprofit. I mean, it should be perhaps a higher level because for my nonprofit, I'm going to make sure that this kid gets money to go to school, and that perhaps is more noble than regular business. Some people would argue. So, but it's the same concept. Written policies. You don't have to necessarily amend your bylaws every time. You can write out a policy. You think nonprofits don't get sued? Yeah, they get sued like anybody else, like any other business. They can be sued as well. And so we want to make sure that we have written policies that we're literally following. What do you include in the policies? I want to make sure our policy about document retention. I want to make sure that our corporate papers are somewhere, conflicts of interest, um, committees, and what those duties are. So therefore, we can know when someone is not doing what they're supposed to do, what they said they're going to do for the organization. Hiring policies, and 100%, anybody who gets a dime, I don't mean the kids who get the scholarship money. Anybody we're paying for a service, there has to be a written documentation. You know, I worked with a nonprofit one time that would write checks to a board member for cash, and she would use the cash. But again, I'm a lawyer. I say stuff that sounds so terrible because I don't tell you the rest of the details. So I say the egregious way first, and I'll come back and say, well, she would do stuff like we had a building in this nonprofit. The nonprofit owned a building. She was in charge of making sure the maintenance people got paid. Now, how many maintenance people you know want a check? Okay, I'm just telling the truth. They want cash. So we write a check out of her. I didn't know this was happening, first of all. Hold on. I didn't know this was happening. But when I found out, I bet you we stopped it. Because I was a board member there. The check was written out to her for cash, and she would take the cash and go do the things with it. But the problem is, what is the documentation that you spent? You told me, because every now and then I was suspicious when I went back and looked at this. Wait a minute now. Why do we pay $100 this month for the grass to be cut, but then this month is $60? I mean, where's the contract for the? And I know that Billy Bob doesn't have contracts. He just cuts people's grass. I understand that, and I engage with Billy Bob as well for my own personal business. But for my nonprofit, why don't we help Billy Bob have a contract? Okay, why don't we prepare a contract for Billy Bob? Here you go. Give us this is your. Why don't we show Billy Bob how to write a receipt? Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. For my nonprofit, I need documentation anytime. My rule is I don't have many rules for nonprofits, but one of the rules is when you let a dime go out of your bank account, you will have written documentation of it. And again, in all fairness, the guy who cleans my office, if I wrote him a check, he'd be mad because our average is $20, and I guarantee you he will spend $8 of the check cashing place to cash the check, and I get that. I get why you'd rather have $20, you know, but not for your nonprofit. You got to, at a minimum, go to Walmart, buy a receipt book for Billy Bob, and give him a receipt book. And when you give him that $20, he needs to write you a receipt, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You just help him become a better business person. Let me pass out these real quick for you. It's a survey as you sign out. Okay. All right, but that's something that we have to do, and I suggest it for my regular businesses, but I insist upon it for my nonprofits, okay? Now, let's see. Losing your exempt status. Let me back up. One of the ways you can lose your exempt status is, of course, engaging in prohibited activity, providing compensation that's not reasonable. I don't think any of this shocks us. Providing a private benefit to someone, you have paid someone and you can't justify the payments because they're not outside of market value. Those are big examples of things you can't do. And again, none of this is shocking. It's just we as legal professionals have got to make sure that we're giving our clients this advice. Private benefits prohibited. Steps to protect against a private benefit. Divide up financial duties. You know, maybe you have more than one person to sign off on checks. That's very common for a nonprofit, particularly to have more than one person sign off on on checks. Now, I will tell you, if both of the people didn't know what they were doing, because you know what? Remember those checks we wrote out to cash at the nonprofit that I work with? 2 people signed those checks, and both of them signed a check to somebody for cash with no documentation. But again, that's an opportunity for us to teach. Yes.
Something I can, because I did a meeting with a trustee or something, virtually all banks will not care if the check is 2 parties, because there's so much electronic processing. Even if there's only one signature on the check or whatever, it it's going to run through the system and be cashed regardless.
I think that's probably true. The comment was if you have a check that requires two signature lines, most banks are going to cash even one signature. But the thing is, if we're as board members and we're looking at the financial records and we're seeing the bank account statements, we will see the cash check that only had one signature and know that that violates our policy, right? So we are advising our clients as board members to look at that. So having the audits is going to be something that helps you, the good record keeping, and it makes sure you maintain your conflict of interest policy. You're not going to engage in what we call political activity. However, awareness is a noble objective. That is appropriate. I think sometimes people dance around this a little bit more than I would let them do, or because, for example, can your nonprofit host an event where you invite Governor Cooper to come speak? The answer is
Yes.
of course you can. There's nothing, that's not political activity, right? You're inviting him to speak. Are you then required, if Governor McCrory wins 4 years from now, are you required to now invite him to speak? Of course you're not, because that's not political activity. Now, what will happen when you invite Governor Cooper to come to an event and he's speaking and it's about a children's event for fundraising, whatever, but he starts talking about how the Republicans are terrible. He's giving this talk and he's saying, you guys, I really need you to help me get Democrats in office because you put me in office as governor, but you gave me Republican Senate. Look what they're doing. They're crazy. They're nut jobs. I'm not saying this. This is Governor Cooper. So, but what do? You're the executive director of the nonprofit. You're a board member of the nonprofit. What are you going to do?
Don't smile.
He says, don't smile. It's a difficult situation because the truth is, number one, you can't control what he says. But number two, it's your event.
Right.
And now it's really looking like it's a partisan event. And so I think it is appropriate to provide caveats to speakers ahead of time. That becomes part of your board policy. Dear speaker, thank you for agreeing to speak at this event. We are nonpartisan. Please know that. Is that not better? Now you have something that says, well, we told him not to do that. Because the truth is, you can tell me whatever you want. I'm going to say what I want, and so it is what it is. But how do you protect yourself? Because you have someone who gets upset inside of that event, and now they're filing a complaint with the IRS and trying to get you to lose your status. That's when it becomes a non-laughing matter. And so your response to that has to be, how did I protect myself in this situation? Well, we wrote a letter to him and told him that we couldn't have that. So that's the example. There actually is a complicated rule that talks about how nonprofits are not supposed to do things that directly compete with for-profit business. So it's very complicated though, because it's hard to not have an overlap, but there are things that are in the clear domain of for-profits that your nonprofit should not engage in, right? But I see so much wiggle room with that. I was thinking of an example. A nonprofit shouldn't own a grocery store, right? Oh, wait a minute, back up. I have a much better example for you. A nonprofit should not own a clothing store, right? Somebody knows where I'm going with this, don't you? That's not a nonprofit activity to own a clothing store. That's Macy's, JCPenney's. They're for-profits, right? Right? Goodwill.
Isn't even Goodwill for profit?
But exactly, right? So what happens? You have how many organizations? You have 2 organizations. So there's still, Pepsi has a Pepsi Foundation, right? And so they have a soda that they sell, and for all the proceeds from this particular clear Pepsi are going to go toward the Pepsi Foundation. That's fine, because the Pepsi Foundation cannot go sell sodas. You see the difference? And so that's how you're going to structure these organizations. That's how you're going to structure it so that your client says, I want to have a clothing store, but I want my clothing store's proceeds to go to a nonprofit, so therefore I have a nonprofit clothing store. No, you don't. You have a for-profit clothing store with a good heart. So your for-profit clothing store is the ABC Clothing Store, and they can donate everything they want to the ABC Store Foundation. I shouldn't say ABC now I think about it, but you understand what I'm saying? But anyway, and so that's the example of how you want to navigate that. So as usual, I don't finish my PowerPoints, but and as usual, I recommend you go read at your leisure. But definitely, if you think about engaging this activity, I really do, in all earnestness, want you to go read the instruction pages. At a minimum, there's instruction pages for the state form. State form is super easy. The only caveat for the state form, and that's for the nonprofit and the for-profit, is go ahead and put a physical location inside the state of North Carolina for that. I think one of the forms, it makes it look like that's not required. That's a trick. It is required. You need a physical location in the state of North Carolina to have to create your organization here. You can register your organization here, but be incorporated somewhere else, right? But if you want to incorporate North Carolina, go ahead and have a physical address, okay? Not a PO box and not outside the state. You had a last question, comment?
I did. You had mentioned a client who wanted to do good and you could put her in touch with a mentor. When you have people come to you and they want to form a nonprofit and are interested in getting grants, is that just a completely separate area, getting grants and grant writing, or do you have resources that you might refer clients to secure grants or apply for grants?
That's a good question. The question was, what do you do if a client comes to you, and actually this is very common, they're going to also ask you to help them write the grant. My answer is, I'm not going to help you write the grant for one reason only, and that is because it's too expensive for you to hire a lawyer to write a grant. Okay, that's really the reason I would not do that. I would refer them to other people who have grant writing experience. That's what I would do, only because you talking to me as a lawyer, and I'm charging legal fees for that, and it's really not a legal service, and I feel like I'm overcharging you if I charge you to write the grant. And so I appreciate the fact that I do have people in our community that I can say, go speak to this person. We have business incubators, and see, I'm plugging Robinson County now, right? We have business incubators that actually help people formulate their businesses and provide consultations as far as the truly business side, because I want to do what I know how to do, which is the legal side, and I need help learning how to be a better business person as far as marketing and things of that nature, and so that's not my area. But I'm not going to send them out to the cold and say, oh, I can help you go away. I think that it's more of a comprehensive service, because the thing is, this young lady who wants to start this nonprofit, she was taken aback by how much it was taking to start. She wasn't ready to start the nonprofit, okay? It doesn't mean she won't get ready. And so I sent her to someone who could help her, partly because I think her idea probably could use some development, but also in the end, when you're ready to form the nonprofit, come on back to the Peterkin Law Firm, okay, and we'll take care of that for you. I'm just not going to be able to help you at the infancy of an idea. I'm there when you're ready to execute it. So I think that's where we're better at as lawyers. All right, well, we really appreciate you guys participating with us today. Thank you guys